Welcome to our third chapter in Module 3. And this chapter is very interesting because it deals with a very important but very controversial topic, that of conflict. And of course, when we are discussing group and team level activities, there is always the possibility of the advent of conflict arising. So we want to look at that, some of the antecedents of conflict, define really what it is, how it influences people within the organization, and in turn influences outcomes for the organization. And finally, we want to look at negotiation and how this can actually help and potentially hurt organizations, and the process that is undertaken when people in organizations do or behave in negotiation contexts. Well, some of the phenomena and trends that we've discussed before do contribute to the increased level of conflict in organizations, and in fact make conflict somewhat inevitable in contemporary organizations. One is the constant change that is occurring in most organizational environments. The fact that most organizations deal in very competitive, volatile environments suggests that there is a greater likelihood that people will feel that change and become more uncomfortable and more likely to have some type of disagreement. A great employee diversity, more people work in organizations with built-in differences. This is again likely to contribute to some increased disagreement and conflict. More teams being used. The fact that we have now virtual, self-managed, grouped and team structures are the norm rather than the exception increases the likelihood for conflict. Less face-to-face communication, more technological communication. Again, the fact that we can't really see each other might lead to more disagreement. And a global economy, more cross-cultural differences. People within organizations that are culturally distinct, as well as more interaction between and among organizations or entity in organizations with those in foreign lands and foreign places, can lead to an increased level of conflict. So as we normally do, let's start off with the definition of our concept. And conflict is defined here as the process in which one party perceives its interests are being opposed or negatively affected by another party. Essentially, there is some type of disagreement. My interest or the interest of my team is not aligned with the interest of you or your team. That's what conflict is. But it's very important here to recognize and to pay attention to the word perceives. Like much of what we've spoken about in organizational behavior thus far, conflict is essentially a psychological or cognitive process. So it has to do more with the subjective perception of an individual or group in terms of disagreement, rather than there really be some type of tangible objective disagreement there. So in truth and in fact, the reality is conflict does not have to occur simply because there is an actual misalignment of interest. It can occur if there is just a perceived misalignment of interest. And that's really important to recognize that this is something that is occurring cognitively. And in order for us to address it, we really have to get to the roots of why people believe there is in fact disagreement. Well, the early approaches to management theory saw conflict as always being a bad thing, something that had to be either avoided or quickly quashed. The organizational behaviorist, the human relations school, also saw conflict as being negative and having to be resolved, but recognized that it was essentially somewhat inevitable in organizations. Contemporary approaches to conflict, however, distinguish between what's called functional conflict and dysfunctional conflict. Functional conflict is characterized by consultative interactions, focus on issues, mutual respect, and useful give and take. It's called constructive conflict. Here, there is disagreement between people, between teams, but the conflict is managed in such a way that it actually brings about benefits for the organization, because rather than people focus on the personalities, focus on some kind of personal or team level differences, they are focused more on what issues have to be resolved, and they try to create and foster respect for each other, and there is some type of give and take, some kind of consultative interaction where we're trying to learn from each other. That's functional conflict. It helps the firm. Dysfunctional conflict is the one that we traditionally think about. It's the one that threatens the organization's interest. It's the one that leads to problems in terms of the outcomes of these disagreements. And here, in fact, you see some of the antecedents of both functional and dysfunctional conflict. And you see things like overlapping or unclear job boundaries, unreasonable deadlines or extreme time pressure, inadequate communication, organizational complexity. Again, what I want you to realize here is that the antecedents of both functional and dysfunctional conflict are very similar. It's situations where people are in some way uncomfortable, where there is built-in misalignment between goals, where there is pressures being exerted on individuals or teams. So the antecedents of conflict are similar in both functional and dysfunctional conflict situations. What's different or what distinguishes both is really how the conflict is addressed and how the conflict is managed. So conflict by itself is not necessarily a good thing because disagreement will not necessarily create an atmosphere of trust. It will not necessarily create an atmosphere of cooperation. However, if the conflict is managed constructively and thus produces functional conflict outcomes, then you are likely to see benefits associated with this group. If you remember when I was talking about team development, I indicated that a storming phase can actually help help a team become more cohesive in the norming phase and more performance oriented in the performance phase. And you see that here. Functional conflict can in fact work and can in fact benefit firms if it is managed correctly. Well, the reality is, if most people are asked, they would say that they would rather avoid conflict rather than dealing with it. And the reason is because of some of the things highlighted here. You don't want to lose people. You don't want to have that loss of relationship. You don't want to break the intimacy level that you may have with someone. You don't want to say the wrong things and hurt someone. You don't want to have to increase the level of anger or angst or frustration between and among people. You don't want to be rejected, if you will, and you don't want to cause anyone harm. All of these are real reasons why, as individuals, we try to, as best as we can, most individuals, I should say, try as best as we can to avoid conflict. But you will see that avoiding conflict does not necessarily lead to beneficial results. All it does is perhaps pacify a situation, it calms a situation down for a period of time, but rarely does it ever lead to any type of real beneficial or long-lasting results. And so therefore avoiding conflict may feel okay for the time, but all you're doing is delaying a situation. Well, while most of us really want to avoid conflict, we don't want to deal with the negative outcomes of avoidance. What we really want is some tangible resolution to our conflict and to have some desired outcomes being evoked from the actual conflict resolution. And the first outcome is the agreement. We want a situation where we don't feel like our interests are unaligned or that we're still at odds. We want to have some kind of agreement between each other. Secondly, we want to have that stronger relationship. We want to build upon our existing relationship and we want to increase the level of trust and intimacy. As I mentioned before, when we talked about storming, actually going through some type of conflict, especially functional conflict, can help people and can help groups to foster greater and stronger and more mature relationships between and among themselves. And the third outcome of conflict that we desire is to have increased learning. We want to know more about ourselves, but we want to know more about the situation. So it can help us to learn about ourselves, learn about or the individuals that we're interacting with, as well as improving the quality and the creativity of, let's say, decision making, as we've seen before. When we interact with others and we resolve our differences, we can actually come, what can actually result is something better and more quality driven than what was presently there. So there is three desired outcomes: agreement, stronger relationships, and in fact increased learning. Well, what are some of the most distinct forms of conflict that we find in organizations? Well, the first one, and it's probably one that you are most familiar with, I should say, is a personality conflict. And this is where interpersonal opposition is driven by personal dislike or disagreement. So this is simply a case where someone or people within the organization don't really like other individuals in the organization, not because of some type of professional differences, but more so because of some personal differences, whether that be their personalities, whether that be the way they speak, whether that be essentially the way they dress or just kind of their behavior. Something about this person just does not sit well with me. And so because of that, we'll tend to have a conflict. We'll tend to have a lot of disagreement. I'm sure you might have had a situation where you've been working with someone and you say, you know what? I just don't like that person. I just don't like the way they do things or the way they act. I just kind of, when I'm in their presence, it doesn't leave me with a good feeling. And because of that, you're likely to see a lot of disagreement occurring. Personality conflict accounts for a significant amount of disagreement in organizations, a significant amount of problems. Well, while you might think to avoid to deal with personality conflict, the best way to deal with it is just to simply avoid people. That might not necessarily be an option, and might not necessarily be the best option. Some of the ways to actually deal with it from the employee's perspective, it says here you can communicate directly with the other person to resolve the perceived conflict and emphasize problem solving a common objective, not personality. So you don't want to go up to the person and just say, you know what, man, I just don't like you. I just don't like your personality. You're kind of like, you're just kind of too aggressive. I can't deal with that. No, try to find some commonalities and try to deal if there is a situation with the professional problems or differences rather than the personal problems. If you're a third party, for example, if you see conflict arising between two of your fellow employees, what you might do is you try not to take sides and say, okay, yeah, yeah, oh, I totally agree with you. This guy's, he's a nut job. He's totally, totally different from us. I don't know, why why we even having him in the organization. You don't want to do that. You want to maybe suggest to the parties that they work things out in a constructive and positive way. So try to find some common ground and help them. If you're a manager, you want to first investigate and document conflict, and then take appropriate action, take corrective action if necessary. You might want to use some informal dispute resolutions. You might kind of want to bring people together and say, okay, listen, how can we best resolve what's going on so that we can work together? Find a way to see or try to find some common ground in those types of disagreements. Well, another type of conflict that is common in organizations is intergroup conflict. And this is not a conflict within groups, but conflict between groups in organizations. We mentioned before that one of the trends that increases the propensity or likelihood for conflict in organizations is the greater use of teams and group structures in organizations. And when there is conflict between and among these groups, this intergroup conflict can in fact hurt the organization. It says here, and we've mentioned this before, that too much cohesiveness can breed the groupthink phenomena. You should remember that phenomena we talked about when we talked about teams and groups, because a desire to get along pushes aside critical thinking. One of the characteristics of groupthink going back was that the group itself was too cohesive and saw themselves as essentially being invulnerable. They also saw groups outside of their domain as being competitive or as being significantly different and many times inferior to them. And that type of thinking that comes along with groupthink or that creates groupthink also leads to a level of intergroup conflict. Because I don't think you are equal to me before, because in fact I think I am dominant, and that you are my competitor, that you are essentially against me, then I'm likely to have more conflict, more disagreement with you. Well, can intergroup conflict actually be resolved? Well, the answer is perhaps. And one of the arguments is that it can be diminished by this contact hypothesis. And what is that? It says the more the members of different groups interact, the less intergroup conflict they will experience. And this can be shown if you've ever seen the movie Remember the Titans with Denzel Washington. He had a situation where he came in to coach a high school football team, I believe it was in West Virginia, and these gentlemen they were from two very distinct ethnic groups. They were African Americans and they were Caucasian Americans, and they never associated with each other before the coach comes in. And so what he does is in fact he makes each African American player a room with a Caucasian player during training camp. And what he does, the reason he's doing this, I should say, is to increase the interaction level between these individuals, because the belief is that if you are able to have relationships with me, if you're able to interact with me more, then you're less likely to see me as the enemy. There is going to be increased likelihood for me to learn from you, and that's actually what happened. He made them initially start talking to each other, asking them personal questions. But that's the argument of contact hypothesis. The more that we interact, the more that we engage with each other, the less likely we are to see each other as either being inferior or as competitive or combative. And that's going to lead to more harmony between groups. It said managers should identify and root out negative linkages. So try to diminish the negativity between. And this is also seen here as some of the lessons for handling intergroup conflict. Managers faced with intergroup conflict identify and root out those negative linkages. So if there are people, for example, that are in one group that is spreading bad rumors about another, you want to kind of get rid of that. You want to get rid of these negativity, these stereotypes that might exist between and among groups. And managers are therefore wise to note negative interactions between members and groups and determine if influential third parties are gossiping. So there's a case where somebody who may not even necessarily be in any of those groups are creating discord or disharmony. You want to get rid of this because it's the negative stereotypes. It's this feeling that we don't get along. Remember, again, conflict doesn't have to be real; it can just be perceived, and that's what Denzel Washington was trying to, his character, I should say, was trying to show these young men that a lot of this conflict was actually perceived. They didn't really hate each other. They didn't really have disagreement as much as they perceived they did. And so trying to get rid of that, trying to root out that negativity is very important in managers in helping to promote intergroup harmony and intergroup agreement. Getting people obviously to interact with each other more often, but also getting rid of the negativity that might exist. Well, while there are more teams and groups in organizations, there are also more cultures, I should say, being represented in organizations. And because of different assumptions about how to think and act, the potential for cross-cultural conflict is both immediate and huge. Again, culture is such a big part of who we are, influences who we are into such a degree that the differences across cultures can lead to some significant conflict and disagreement. We just don't see the world the same way. And because of that, we are often forced into situations or feel like we're forced into situations to defend ourselves and to defend our cultures. And that can lead to a high level of ethnocentrism, where we again consider our culture to be more superior to those of others. And this cross-cultural conflict can, as it said here, have immediate and huge impacts. We can create many wars have been started, let me say, because people in high levels have not understood each other from the cultural perspective and have created this level of disagreement that could not be easily resolved. Success or failure, when conducting business across cultures, often hinges on avoiding and minimizing actual or perceived conflict. So for us to be able to get along in business transactions, we have to recognize our disagreements and we have to try to find ways to work around those disagreements or to avoid those disagreements in such a way that promotes a beneficial result for both parties. Well, I can give you an example of a cross-cultural conflict situation that occurred to me when I was in China. When I was visiting, I wanted to do certain things in terms of being able to see some of the place and be able to communicate with people about some of the study abroad programs that we were proposing. And my Chinese host wanted me to spend a lot of time in the classroom. And so there was a level of conflict there initially, and we tried to resolve it. We used a lot of the behaviors that you see here and how to actually build cross-cultural relationships and decrease cross-cultural conflict. Being a good listener, not just saying what you want to see done, but actually listening to the other party and trying to understand their perspective. being sensitive to the needs of others. I had to recognize that these people really wanted me to educate them in terms of how the American business perspective was viewed, and so I had to be sensitive to that as I planned my itinerary, being cooperative rather than competitive. So I didn't just say, you know what, this is me against you, and they didn't do that either. We really wanted to find some common ground. Compromise rather than dominate. We had to, in fact, compromise. So I spent some time in the classroom, I spent some time sightseeing, and avoid conflict by emphasizing harmony. Trying to find some common ground, trying to find what we both wanted from this really helped in terms of resolving that conflict situation. Another type of conflict common in a lot of organizations now is something that you may not consider or think about as being conflict is what we call the work-family conflict. And this is occurring when the demands of one's work role conflicts with those of the family role. And obviously with people working more now, especially people who are trying to climb the corporate ladder, you find yourself having to balance the obligations within the family with those of the organization and your employees. And for many people, that's a very tense and very stressful situation because you obviously recognize that you have some familial obligations as a parent, as a spouse, but you also have your work and your organizational responsibilities that might increase or that you might want to see increase as you try to again climb the corporate ladder. So this easing this tension or finding ways to mediate this conflict or make it much more bearable is something that most employees and many managers are faced with today in contemporary organizational settings. Well, some insights about how to resolve this conflict, if you will. Work-family balance really begins at home. You have to have people in your family that support you what you do in terms of your work endeavors and really are there as a system, as a support system to help you. An employer's family supportive philosophy is more important than the program. So it's just not enough to have flex time or to just have some kind of childcare. You really have to embody as an organization a philosophy where you believe or you demonstrate to your employees that their family and their familial obligations are hugely important. Informal flexibility in work hours, allowing people to work at home. Again, that just kind of helps the person in the organization to feel like they don't have to compromise what they're required to do at home for their jobs. I remember one of my colleagues, when she had a baby last year, she was able to have a few weeks of the semester, beginning of the semester, she was able to do her classes online because that helped her to take care of her baby and also take care of her work obligations. Having supportive boss and colleagues, again, that was a big part in that example. And the importance of work-family balance, you should recognize it doesn't necessarily, it isn't consistent across all generations, and you have to recognize that, especially if you have generational gaps in the organization itself. Well, going back to our conversation on conflict and the two types of conflict, you remember that functional conflict was actually seen as a productive process in the organization. And as I mentioned before, what distinguishes functional conflict from dysfunctional conflict is really how management operates or how management intervenes in terms of the actual conflict situation. So management has a large part to play in making a conflict situation functional or dysfunctional. And so because there are benefits to functional conflict, managers might actually want to stimulate some of that functional conflict rather than just try to avoid all conflict to get or to actually create some of the beneficial results that come from functional conflict. And there are a couple of ways to do this. One is the devil's advocacy approach, which is basically you're assigning someone to be the role of the critic. So when you have a decision to be made, for example, and a proposal has been delivered, you actually identify someone in your group and you say, you know what, your job is to critique this. Give us an alternative. Tell us why this may not work or why something else may work. That's a devil's advocacy approach. A dialectic method is somewhat similar to that, but you have a structured debate that basically is created around two opposing views. So you have an alternative and you have something that is distinct from that alternative, and you argue for and against both. So figure 11 dash 1 in your book on page 298, I don't actually have it here, kind of gives you a rundown on each one. And I'll just use an example to show you the distinction. The example is, let's say the firm is deciding upon creating or building a factory in China. And with the devil advocacy, that's the proposal there. Someone or some group in the organization is going to be given the task of critiquing that. So they're going to look for reasons why that may not necessarily be the best course of action. They're going to present that to the committee or to whoever who is deciding upon that, and then that committee is going to use that and other information to determine, okay, whether they should quash the project, whether they should modify the project, or whether they should just simply adopt the project based upon that information. That's the devil advocacy approach. In the dialectic method, for example, there might be a proposed course of action. The proposed course of action is, let's say we're getting into China. One person, one group will be vested with the responsibility of creating a proposal around exporting just to China. The other one will be foreign direct investment, actually building a factory there. And so each one of those proposals are argued, they're viewed, they're critiqued, and then the best proposal is chosen from the two, and then that's the one that's going to be implemented. And sometimes, in fact, they may not choose either proposal. They might actually decide to go with something else. Well, how do human beings handle conflict? Meaning, what is your preferred style of handling a conflict situation? Well, you will see that individuals differ in terms of their handling styles based on two dimensions. One is the concern for others, and the other is the concern for self. And based on those two dimensions, we actually can create 5 different conflict handling styles. And would like you, as we discuss these, to add or to look at yourself, look within yourself, and ask yourself, which one of these styles do you most likely demonstrate, and in what situations do you most likely demonstrate these styles? Because what you will realize is that as individuals, we may have different conflict styles for different conflict situations. So it's a contingency approach rather than a general or universal approach to handling conflict. Rarely do you see someone utilize the exact same conflict style in every single conflict situation. And the first type of dysfunctional or conflict handling style is this integrating. And in this way, in this approach, we are actually have a high concern for others as well as a high concern for ourselves. So here we're trying to, make sure that we're okay in the conflict handling situation, as well as the other person's interest is taken into consideration. And in this way, it says interested parties confront the issue and cooperatively identify problem, generate and weigh alternative solutions, and select a solution. This is essentially the quintessential win-win approach, where we are again focused on our interests, but we're also focused on the other. So we don't want to win at the expense of someone else. We want to find some kind of mutual agreement where we're both satisfied, where we both get our interests met, and we create some type of long-lasting relationship. It says here it's appropriate for complex issues plagued by misunderstanding. And the reason is in complex issues, it's never that clear cut. It's never necessarily us against them. It's something that will most times require us to really work together to find some type of mutually beneficial arrangement. The problem, however, with this approach is that it can take a very long time, and in situations where our needs or our wants are are at polar opposites, it might be very difficult for us to find any kind of mutual or common ground in which to build one proposal that benefits both of us equally. The second conflict handling style is obliging, or sometimes called smoothing. And it says it tends to minimize differences and highlight similarities to please the other party. In this scenario, I actually have concern or little concern for myself and more concern for others. It says here it's appropriate when it's possible to get something in return. It's also appropriate when the situation that I am basically obliging in is not necessarily that important to me. It's somewhat trivial. So for example, if my boss said to me, you know what, man, can you finish, or can you take minutes for this meeting? I may not want to take minutes for the meeting. It's not something that I really care to do. So we have some kind of disagreement. I really just kind of wanted to sit back here and just listen to what others have said. But in the grand scheme of things, it's really not that huge of a deal to me. And it might be a bigger deal to him because he doesn't have anybody to take the minutes. The other benefit to me obliging in that situation is that, the next time around, or if I go in and say, hey man, listen, you know what? I'm not going to be able to make this next meeting. Is that okay? He might likely say, oh yeah, that's fine, because he's going to remember, oh, you know what, last time you took minutes, you did something I wanted you to do. You put my interest ahead of yours, and so now I'm going to kind of reciprocate that. So you want to oblige when, one, the situation is not a big deal really, and two, that there's potential for something in return. You definitely don't want to oblige when the situation is a big deal. And so, for example, if your boss says, I need you to work every Saturday for the rest of the year, then you might want to, really deal with that rather than just saying, okay, yes, sure, that's fine, because it's really important. And the third style is the dominating style, and this is where you rely on formal authority to force compliance. It's a situation where the person who has the greater power in the conflict situation essentially uses their authority, uses their power to force the other person to do what they wish them to do. Now, that isn't as callous as it sounds, and many times you do this, or you use this forcing type conflict style when it is a very unpopular solution that's being implemented. So when nobody really wants to do it, or nobody really wants to accept it, the manager often has to kind of put their foot down and say, okay, this is what we're doing. And the reason why we're doing it is because I'm the manager and we have to do it. The other reason, of course, that is when you want to use forcing is when it's, you're on a deadline or something needs to be done quickly. Take for example, I have a 3-year-old son, and sometimes we need to go somewhere really quickly, and he has to get in his car seat, and there's times where he's like, I don't really feel like getting into my car seat right now. Well, because I have more authority in that situation, I basically force him, I put him into that car seat, and I kind of quench or quash, I should say, the disagreement, the conflict, because I can. The problem with using this is, of course, it's good when you're trying to, implement something unpopular, or you're working on a deadline. It's a crisis situation. You can't continuously use this because it's going to really create an atmosphere of mistrust. It's also going to create an atmosphere where the other party feels that they can never participate in the decision making on the conflict resolution. The fourth style to conflict handling, dysfunctional conflict handling, is avoiding. And then we've kind of talked a little bit about avoiding before. It involves either passive withdrawal from the problem or active suppression of the issue. And in this case, not only I don't have an interest, or I don't have a concern for the interests of others. I don't have really a concern for the interests of myself. I don't really want to deal with the conflict. And in most times, this is really kind of appropriate when it's not really a hugely important issue, So let's say you kind of have this coworker, and they come in the office, and they're always like, whenever you're working, they kind of always want to make small talk, but they don't do it for a long time. They just kind of, but it kind of bothers you a little bit. It takes you up a little bit. Yeah, you just might not say anything because you in your mind, you know what, you say, hey, if I try to, get involved in it, if I mention something about it, it's gonna be worse than if I just don't say anything at all. We have a saying in the Caribbean, the candle costs more than the funeral. And so sometimes you just don't want to make a big deal about something. You don't want to get into something because, at the end of the day, it's going to cause more harm than good. Now, you definitely don't want to avoid a situation where you have a real bad reaction to the disagreement, when it's something that just really irritates you and you cannot get over it. This person is constantly in your office and it's really hurting your work production. You really want to deal with that. But when it's something trivial, you can just kind of let it go. And the fifth approach is probably something that we're most aware of, or most familiar with, I should say, is that the compromising approach. And this is really where there's a give and take approach involving both moderate concern for self and for others. Okay, so when I'm making these deals, if you will, there is some concern for myself and there is some concern for others. I want to make sure that I'm taken care of, and I also, to some extent, want to make sure that they're taken care of. But contrasted the integrating approach, rather than trying to find some type of mutual agreement where both parties are kind of winning. I'm essentially trying to minimize my loss in the arrangement. I'm giving and taking, so I'm going to win some battles and I'm going to lose some battles. So I'm willing to give up some of my interests so that the interest of the other is being met. But on the same time, I want to get something from that person through this compromising situation. So it might be a case where, let's say my wife and I, we want to go, she wants to go to the fashion show and I want to stay home and watch the basketball game. Well, we might compromise in a way where she'll say, you know what, well, let's go to the fashion show and you'll miss the first half of the game, but then you'll be back in time for the second. What we've done is compromise there, okay? Yes, I haven't seen the entire game, which would be the most ideal situation for me, and maybe she didn't get to spend as much time at the fashion show as she wanted to. And so we both kind of lost something, but we've gained something else in return. And so there's some kind of resolution, if you will. And talking about resolutions, rather than getting into very costly lawsuits, rather than taking someone to court and going through litigation, a lot of times now organizations are using what we call these third-party interventions, these alternative dispute resolution. You might hear this a lot in baseball. Right now, there's this huge drug scandal that's going on. And so rather than kind of accepting or penalties or kind of having this, I'll take you to court kind of thing, what happens is that both Major League Baseball and the Players Union kind of decide upon this arbitration process where you have an objective third party listen to the conflict, manage the conflict in such a way where each party's perspectives and interests are heard, and then they make a decision that seems fair or hopefully seems fair to both parties. And in that way, again, you minimize the fractions that can be caused and the cost, of course, that can be incurred through lawsuits, through legal actions, and you utilize these third-party interventions that hopefully bring about a level of fairness and equity to the situation. The last area that we want to discuss in this chapter is negotiation, and that kind of builds from what we discussed in terms of our compromising approach to conflict resolution or conflict handling. And in negotiation, it's really a give and take decision-making process involving interdependent parties with different preferences. So here we have again a situation where there's likelihood of conflict, there's different interests here, and we're trying to make some decision. We're trying to identify some proposal that we essentially can both live with. There's really two types of negotiation. The first one is distributive. And distributive, we kind of see things as a fixed pie, a zero-sum game, if you will. So it means that if I win something, if I get something, essentially you have to lose something. And this kind of goes back again to that compromising style of conflict handling. So if I, for example, I'm negotiating my contract with my employer, if they give me more in terms of salary, then essentially they have less money to use. And so that's kind of more of a traditional distributive negotiating perspective. Another type or another approach to negotiation is what we call integrative. And in integrative, we don't really see things as a fixed pie. We kind of more see it as now a little bit of cliche, the win-win situation, where we can essentially find some proposal that not only benefits each party relatively, but can in fact benefit each party more so than they may believe coming into the. And this type of integrative negotiation is characteristic of added value negotiation, where you're cooperating, cooperatively, I should say, developing a mutual deal packages where about building a productive long-term relationships. So if you take the traditional approach to negotiation, the compromising approach, and let's use this in terms of an environmental agency interacting with a business place. Well, environmental agency wants to ensure that the natural environment is taken care of, it's sustained, it's it's well endowed, and that's their agenda. In the business world, of course, doing these things might not only allow or increase their cost level, but might also hurt their ability to maximize their profit. So it seems that there is a level of disagreement here. One hand, the environmental agency wants the environment to be taken care of. The other hand, the business wants to ensure that its profits, its shareholders are not jeopardized. And so how can we use added value negotiation? We might be able to find ways that doing projects together can actually help or increase the interest of both parties. So is there a way for the business itself to actually benefit in terms of its financial well-being by being environmentally conscious? And the answer might be yes. By reducing their carbon emissions, by using recycled materials, that can actually help in terms of efficiency. It also promotes the environmental agency's agenda because it protects the environment, but also working together can allow them to create a new type of entity that can actually be more beneficial than if they worked apart. So that's the added value negotiation. And how is that achieved? Well, first of all, each party has to really clarify what they want out of this. So you have to see, okay, what are your interests before that you can actually go ahead with the negotiations. Then you can identify options. What are the different approaches to doing this? And it can't be at this stage where, okay, I win, you lose. You have to identify options that both parties have stakes in and both parties can actually see some benefit from. Then you design in your alternative deal package. You basically put different alternatives on the table and say, okay, we can do X, we can do Y, we can do Z, and kind of try to see which deal works best, right? So yes, while there is a level of course, integration here, there is some level of compromise because at the end of the day, there is still, or there may still be differences in terms of interest. But what you're trying to do, rather than just simply taking from somebody else to give to somebody else, you are actually trying to find the best solution that most likely enhances both parties' interests. And then you try to perfect it. You try to make sure that when it's implemented, it actually results in something good, and you try to build from this negotiation for future relationships. But many times through these types of negotiations, parties actually form partnerships that last long into the future.